In the last episode, Foyle was forced to confront both Olivia and his newfound conscience. Despite her protestations and his love for her, he elected to return to Terra to try to find some way to make amends for the trail of destruction that he left behind in his quest for vengeance. Meanwhile, Dagenham, Yeovil, and Presteign met to share information and strategize about the war. When the question of surrender was broached, Yeovil said that option had been rejected because it was known to intelligence that in that event, the outer satellites intended to enslave and gut the inner planets, which would be no better than defeat. During this meeting, Yeovil deduced that Presteign was considering negotiating and cooperating with the outer satellites for his own safety and property rights under their rule. On being pressed by Dagenham, Presteign refused to disclose details about PyrE and announced that he would withdraw from the meeting and share no more information. The ensuing argument was interrupted by the appearance of Gisbella McQueen, who announced that they had learned from the commando brigade what happened to Foyle. She described his attempt to flee from Mars and his subsequent rescue by the Presteign ship SS Vorga. Shocked at this news, they all turned on Presteign, who they presumed had known this all along. It soon became apparent that he was equally shocked and had to reluctantly admit that this was Olivia's doing. He was horrified at the thought of Olivia in a romance with Foyle, so much so that his agitation caused him to go into uncontrolled convulsions. Yeovil recognized the epileptic seizure and quickly took appropriate first aid action. When the seizure abated, Presteign, semi-conscious and dazed, began speaking in a trance-like monotone voice. He described the nature of PyrE, a substance possibly akin to the primordial matter that formed the universe that would release thermonuclear energy when triggered. Presteign said that the only thing that could trigger PyrE was, in his words, will and idea. It was activated by psychokenesis, by thought directed at it. Dagenham relayed, over Gisbella's objections, what Foyle had told her about his attempts to analyze PyrE. Dagenham suggested to Yeovil that they should deliberately detonate whatever stray particles of PyrE are loose in Foyle's lair at Old St. Pat's, with the purpose of drawing Foyle there, as he would certainly try to recover the rest of it. He pointed out that most of it should still be in the lead safe, protected from any thought that might activate it. Yeovil at first objected. If all the PyrE detonated, it could be the end of everyone on Terra. But despite his misgivings and over Gisbella's objections, he agreed to Dagenham's plan. He revealed that intelligence had information that the outer satellites knew about the PyrE and Foyle, and had agents looking for Foyle. The situation was so dire that this risk was necessary, and it had to be done right away. Foyle made his next appearance in the offices of Regis Sheffield. He needed legal help. He wanted to turn himself in, but punishment wasn't enough for him. He wanted to repair what he could of the damage he had caused. He explained that he had come down with a conscience. Sheffield retorted that it was often a fatal condition. As Foyle started to recount the list of his crimes for Sheffield, without giving specifics, the lawyer grew skeptical of him and said so. It was too ridiculous a list of crimes for any one man to have possibly committed. Just then, Sheffield's assistant, Bunny, jaunted into the office with a message, expecting Sheffield to be alone. On recognizing Foyle with astonishment and seeing that Sheffield did not know who he was, she told him, "That's 4 Mile of Ceres, Gully Foyle." Will Dagenham and Yeovil succeed in detonating only a few loose bits of PyrE? Or perhaps, will they destroy the planet? Will they succeed in trapping Foyle before the outer satellites find him? Will Sheffield take Foyle's case and help him to make amends? Find out in episode 16 of The Stars, My Destination by Alfred Bester. More than a year ago, Regis Sheffield had been hypnotically fulminated and triggered for this moment. His body had been prepared to respond without thought, and the response was lightning. Sheffield struck Foyle in half a second, temple, throat, and groin. It had been decided not to depend on weapons, since none might be available. Foyle fell. Sheffield turned on Bunny and battered her back across the office. Then he spat into his palm. It had been decided not to depend on drugs, since drugs might not be available. Sheffield's salivary glands had been prepared to respond with an anaphylaxis secretion to the stimulus. He ripped open Foyle's sleeve, dug a nail deep into the hollow of Foyle's elbow, and slashed. He pressed his spittle into the ragged cut and pinched the skin together. A strange cry was torn from Foyle's lips. The tattooing showed livid on his face. Before the stunned law assistant could make a move, Sheffield swung Foyle up to his shoulder and jaunted. He arrived in the middle of the 4-mile circus in Old St. Pat's. It was a daring but calculated move. This was the last place he would be expected to go, and the first place where he might expect to locate the pyre. He was prepared to deal with anyone he might meet in the cathedral, but the interior of the circus was empty. The vacant tents ballooning up in the nave looked tattered. They had already been looted. Sheffield plunged into the first he saw. It was 4 Miles' traveling library, filled with hundreds of books and thousands of glittering novel beads. The jack-jaunters were not interested in literature. Sheffield threw Foyle down on the floor. Only then did he take a gun from his pocket. Foyle's eyelids fluttered. His eyes opened.
You're drugged. Don't try to jaunt, and don't move. I'm warning you. I'm prepared for anything.
Dazedly, Foyle tried to rise. Sheffield instantly fired and seared his shoulder. Foyle was slammed back against the stone flooring. He was numbed and bewildered. There was a roaring in his ears and a poison coursing through his blood.
I'm warning you. I'm prepared for anything.
What do you want?
2 things. 20 pounds of PyrE and you. You most of all.
You lunatic. You damn maniac. I came into your office to give it up.
Can you OS?
To the what?
The outer satellites. Shall I spell it out for you?
No. I might have known. The Patriot, Sheffield. An OS agent. I should have known. I'm a fool.
You're the most valuable fool in the world, Foyle. We want you even more than the PyrE. That's an unknown to us, but we know what you are.
What are you talking about?
My God, you don't know, do you? You still don't know. You haven't an inkling.
Of what?
Now, listen to me. I'm taking you back 2 years to Nomad. Understand? Back to the death of the Nomad. One of our raiders finished her off and they found you aboard the wreck, the last man alive.
So, an OS ship did blast Nomad?
Yes. You don't remember?
I don't remember anything about that. I never could.
Yeah, I'm telling you why. The raider got a clever idea. They turned you into a decoy, a sitting duck, understand? You were half dead, but they took you aboard and patched you up and put you into a spacesuit and cast you adrift with your microwave on. You were broadcasting distress signals and mumbling for help on every wave band. The idea was they'd lurk nearby and pick off the IP ships that came to rescue you.
I'm getting up. Shoot again, you son of a bitch. But I'm getting up.
He struggled to his feet, clutching his shoulder.
So, Vorga shouldn't have picked me up anyway. I was a decoy. Nobody should have come near me. I was a shill, a lure, death bait. Isn't that the final irony? Nomad didn't have any right to be rescued in the first place. I didn't have any right to revenge.
Yeah, you still don't understand. They were nowhere near Nomad when they set you adrift. They were 600,000 miles from Nomad.
600,000.
Nomad was too far out of the shipping lanes. They wanted you to drift where ships would pass. They took you 600,000 miles sunward and set you adrift. They put you through the airlock and backed off, watching you drift. Your suit lights were blinking and you were moaning for help on the microwave. Then it disappeared.
Disappeared?
You were gone. No more lights, no more broadcast. They came back to check. You were gone without a trace. And the next thing we learned, you got back aboard Nomad.
Impossible.
Man, you space John it. You were patched and delirious, but you space John it. You space John it 600,000 miles through the void back to the wreck of the Nomad. You did something that's never been done before. God knows how. You don't know even yourself. But we're going to find out. I'm taking you out to the satellites with me, and we'll get that secret out if you have to tear it out.
He took Foyle's throat in his powerful hand and hefted the gun in the other.
But first, I want the PyrE. You'll produce it, Foyle. Don't think you won't.
He lashed Foyle across the forehead with the gun.
Yeah, I'll do anything to get it. Don't think I won't.
He smashed Foyle again, coldly, efficiently.
If you're looking for a purge, man, you found it.
Bunny leapt off the public jaunt stage at 5 Points and streaked into the main entrance of Central Intelligence's New York office like a frightened rabbit. She shot past the outermost guard cordon, through the protective labyrinth, and into the inner offices. She acquired a train of excited pursuers and found herself face to face with the more seasoned guards who had calmly jaunted to positions ahead of her and were waiting. Bunny began to shout,
Yeovil! Yeovil! Yeovil!
Still running, she dodged around desks, kicked over chairs, and created an incredible uproar. She continued yelling,
Yeovil! Yeovil! Yeovil!
Just before they were about to put her out of her misery, Yeovil appeared.
What's all this? I gave orders that Miss Winsbury was to have absolute quiet.
Yeovil! Yeovil!
Who's that?
Yeovil, Sheffield's assistant.
What? Bunny?
Foyle, Gully Foyle.
Yeovil covered the 50 feet between them in exactly 1.66 seconds.
What about Foyle?
Sheffield's got him
Sheffield? When?
half an hour ago.
Why didn't he bring him here?
He abducted him. I think Sheffield's an OS agent.
Why didn't you come at once?
Sheffield jaunted with Foyle, knocked him stiff, and disappeared. I went looking all over, took a chance. Must have made 50 jaunts in 20 minutes.
Oh, amateur. Why didn't you leave that to the pros?
Found him.
You found them. Where?
Old St. Pat's. Sheffield's after the...
But Yeovil had turned on his heel and was tearing back up the corridor, shouting,
Robin! Robin! Stop! Stop!
And then their ears were bruised by the bellow of thunder. Like widening rings in a pond, the will and the idea spread, searching out, touching and tripping the delicate subatomic trigger of PyrE. The thought found particles, dust, smoke, vapor, motes, molecules. The will and the idea transformed them all. In Sicily, where Dr. Franco Torre had been working for an exhausting month, attempting to unlock the secret of one slug of PyrE, the residues and the precipitates had been dumped down a drain which led to the sea. For many months, the Mediterranean currents had drifted these residues across the sea bottom. In an instant, a humpbacked mound of water towering 50 feet high traced the courses, northeast to Sardinia and southwest to Tripoli. In a microsecond, the surface of the Mediterranean was raised into the twisted casting of a giant earthworm that wound around the islands of Pantelleria, Lampedusa, Linosa, and Malta. Some of the residues had been burned off, gone up the chimney with smoke and vapor to drift for hundreds of miles before settling. These minute particles showed where they had finally settled in Morocco, Algeria, Libya, and Greece, with blinding pinpoint explosions of incredible minuteness and intensity. And some motes, still drifting in the stratosphere, revealed their presence with brilliant gleams like daylight stars. In Texas, where Professor John Mantley had had the same baffling experience with PyrE, most of the residues had gone down the shaft of an exhausted oil well, which was also used to accommodate radioactive wastes. A deep water table had absorbed much of the matter and spread it slowly over an area of some 10 square miles. 10 square miles of Texas flats shook themselves into corduroy. A vast untapped deposit of natural gas at last found a vent and came shrieking up to the surface, where sparks from flying stones ignited it into a roaring torch 200 feet high. A milligram of PyrE deposited on a disc of filter paper, long since discarded, forgotten, wounded up in a waste paper drive, and at last pulped into a mold for type metal, destroyed the entire late-night edition of the Glasgow Observer. A fragment of PyrE spattered on a lab smock, long since converted into rag paper, destroyed a thank you note written by Lady Shrapnel, and destroyed an additional ton of first-class mail in the process. A shirt cuff, inadvertently dipped into an acid solution of PyrE, long abandoned along with the shirt, and now worn under his mink suit by a jack jaunter, blasted off the wrist and hand of the jack jaunter in one fiery amputation. A decimilligram of PyrE, still adhering to a former evaporation crystal, now in use as an ashtray, kindled a fire that scorched the office of one Baker, dealer in freaks and purveyor of monsters. Across the length and breadth of the planet were isolated explosions, chains of explosions, traceries of fire, pinpoints of fire, meteor flames in the sky, great craters and narrow channels, plowed in the earth, exploded in the earth, vomited forth from the earth. In Old St. Pat's, nearly a tenth of a gram of PyrE was exposed in 4 Miles laboratory. The rest was sealed in its inert lead isotope safe, protected from accidental and intentional psychokinetic ignition. The blinding blast of energy generated from that tenth of a gram blew out the walls and split the floors as though an internal earthquake had convulsed the building. The buttresses held the pillars for a split second and then crumbled. Down came towers, spires, pillars, buttresses, and roof in a thundering avalanche to hesitate above the yawning crater of the floor in a tangled, precarious equilibrium. A breath of wind, a distant vibration, and the collapse would continue until the crater was filled solid with pulverized rubble. The star-like heat of the explosion ignited 100 fires and melted the ancient thick copper of the collapsed roof. If a milligram more of PyrE had been exposed to detonation, the heat would have been intense enough to vaporize the metal immediately. Instead, it glowed white and began to flow. It streamed off the wreckage of the crumbled roof and began searching its way downward through the crumbled stone, iron, wood, and glass, like some monstrous molten mold creeping through a tangled web. Dagenham and Yeovil arrived almost simultaneously. A moment later, Robin Wensbury appeared, and then Gisbella McQueen. A dozen intelligence operatives and 6 Dagenham couriers arrived along with Presteign's jaunt watch and the police. They formed a cordon around the blazing block, but there were very few spectators. After the shock of the New Year's Eve raid, that single explosion had frightened half New York into another wild jaunt for safety. The uproar of the fire was frightful, and the massive grind of tons of wreckage in uneasy balance was ominous. Everyone was forced to shout, and yet was fearful of the vibrations. Young Yeovil bawled the news about Foyle and Sheffield into Dagenham's ear. Dagenham nodded and displayed his deadly smile.
We'll have to go in.
Fire suits!
Young Yeovil disappeared and reappeared with a pair of white disaster crew fire suits. At the sight of these, Robin and Gisbilla began shouting frantic objections. The 2 men ignored them, wriggled into the inert isomer armor, and inched into the inferno. Within Old St. Pat's, it was as though a monstrous hand had churned a logjam of wood, stone, and metal. Through every interstice crawled tongues of molten copper, slowly working downward, igniting wood, crumbling stone, shattering glass. Where the copper flowed, it merely glowed, but where it poured, it spattered dazzling droplets of white-hot metal. Beneath the logjam yawned the black crater where formerly the floor of the cathedral had been. The explosion had split the flagstone asunder, revealing the cellars, subcellars, and vaults deep below the building. These too were filled with a snarl of stones, beams, pipes, wire, the remnants of the 4-mile circus tents, all fitfully lit small fires. Then the first of the drops dripped down into the crater and illuminated it with a brilliant molten splash. Dagenham pounded Young Yeovil's shoulder to attract his attention and pointed. Halfway down the crater, in the midst of the tangle, lay the body. Regis Sheffield, drawn and quartered by the explosion. Young Yeovil pounded Dagenham's shoulder and pointed. Almost at the bottom of the crater lay Gully Foyle, and as the blazing spatter of molten copper illuminated him, they saw him move. The 2 men at once turned and crawled out of the cathedral for a conference.
He's alive.
How is it possible?
I can guess. Did you see the shreds of tent watered near him? It must have been a freak explosion up at the other end of the cathedral, and that tent's in between cushion foil. Then he dropped through the floor before anything else could hit him.
I'll buy that. We've got to get him out. He's the only man who knows where the PyrE is.
Could it still be here, unexploded?
If it's in the ILI safe, yes. That stuff is inert to anything. Never mind that now. How are we going to get him out?
Well, we can't work down from above.
Why not?
Isn't it obvious? One false step and the whole mess will collapse.
Did you see that copper flowing down?
God, yes.
Well, if we don't get him out soon, he'll be at the bottom of a pool of molten copper.
What can we do?
I've got a long shot.
What?
The cellars of the old RCA buildings across the street are as deep as St. Pat's.
And?
We'll go down and try to hole through. Maybe we can pull Foyle out from the bottom.
A squad broke into the ancient RCA buildings, abandoned and sealed up for 2 generations. They went down into the cellar arcades, glimpsing museums of the retail stores of centuries past. They located the ancient elevator shafts and dropped through them into the subcellars filled with electric installations, heat plants, and refrigeration systems. They went down into the subcellars, waist deep in water from the streams of prehistoric Manhattan Island, streams that still flowed beneath the streets that covered them. As they waded through the subcellars, bearing east-northeast to bring up opposite the St. Pat's vaults, they suddenly discovered that the pitch dark was illuminated by a fiery flickering up ahead. Dagenham shouted and flung himself forward. The explosion that had opened the subcellars of St. Pat's had split the septum between its vaults and those of the RCA buildings. Through a jagged rent in stone and earth, they could peer into the bottom of the inferno. 50 feet inside was Foyle, trapped in a labyrinth of twisted beams, stones, pipe, metal, and wire. He was illuminated by a roaring glow from above him and fitful flames around him. His clothes were on fire, and the tattooing was livid on his face. He moved feebly, like a bewildered animal in a maze.
My God! The Burning Man!
What?
The Burning Man I saw on the Spanish stairs. Never mind now. What can we do?
Go in, of course.
A brilliant white gob of copper suddenly oozed down close to Foyle and splashed 10 feet below him. It was followed by a second, a third, a slow, steady stream. A pool began to form. Dagenham and Yeovil sealed the faceplates of their armor and crawled through the break in the septum. After 3 minutes of agonized struggling, they realized that they could not get through the labyrinth of Foyle. It was locked to the outside, but not from the inside. Dagenham and Yeovil backed up to confer.
We can't get to him, but he can get out.
How? He can't jaunt, obviously, or he wouldn't be there.
No, he can climb. Look. He goes left, then up, reverses, takes him along that beam, slides under it, and pushes through that tangle of wire. The wire can't be pushed in, which is why we can't get to him, but it can push out, which is how he can get out. It's a one-way door.
The pool of molten copper crept up toward Foyle.
If he doesn't get out soon, he'll be roasted alive.
We'll have to talk him out. Tell him what to do. Foyle!
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 The burning man in the maze continued to move feebly. The downpour of sizzling copper increased.
Foyle! Turn left! Can you hear me? Foyle! Turn left and climb up. You can get out if you'll listen to me. Turn left and climb up. Then, Foyle!
He's not listening. Foyle! Golly, Foyle! Can you hear us?
Send for Belle. Maybe he'll listen to her.
No, Robin. She'll tell us then. He'll have to listen.
But will she do it? Save him of all people.
She'll have to. This is bigger than hatred. It's bigger. It's the biggest damn thing the world's ever encountered. I'll get her.
Yeovil started to crawl out. Dagenham stopped him.
Wait, yo. Look at him. He's flickering.
Flickering?
Look. He's blinking like a glowworm. Watch. Now you see him. And now you don't.
The figure of Foyle was appearing, disappearing, and reappearing in rapid succession, like a firefly caught in a flaming trap.
What's he doing now? What's he trying to do? What's happening?
He was trying to escape, like a trapped firefly or some seabird caught in the blazing brazier of a naked beacon fire. He was beating about in a frenzy, a blackened, burning creature, dashing himself against the unknown. Sound came as sight to him, as light in strange patterns. He saw the sound of his shouted name in vivid rhythms. Motion came as sound to him. He heard the writhing of the flames. He heard the swirls of smoke. He heard the flickering, jeering shadows, all speaking deafeningly in strange tongues. The steam asked.
Perugiar.
The quick shadows answered.
Asha himba ritke ditse hemget.
The heat ripples clamored.
Oh, tea.
Even the flames smoldering on his own clothes roared gibberish in his ears.
Manchester.
Color was pain to him. Heat, cold, pressure. Sensations of intolerable heights and plunging depths, of tremendous accelerations and crushing compressions. Touch was taste to him. The feel of wood was acrid and chalky in his mouth. Metal was salt. Stone tasted sour-sweet to the touch of his fingers, and the feel of glass cloyed his palate like over-rich pastry. Smell was touch. Hot stone smelled like velvet caressing his cheek. Smoke and ash were harsh tweeds rasping his skin, almost the feel of wet canvas. Molten metal smelled like a blow hammering his heart, and the ionization of the PyrE explosion filled the air with ozone that smelled like water trickling through his fingers. He was not blind, not deaf, not senseless. Sensation came to him, but filtered through a nervous system twisted and short-circuited by the shock of the PyrE concussion. He was suffering from synesthesia, that rare condition in which perception receives messages from the objective world and relays these messages to the brain. But there in the brain, the sensory perceptions are confused with one another. So in Foyle, sound registered as sight, motion registered as sound, colors became pain sensations, touch became taste, and smell became touch. He was not only trapped within the labyrinth of the inferno under Old St. Pat's, he was trapped in the kaleidoscope of his own cross senses. Again desperate, on the ghastly verge of extinction, he abandoned all disciplines and habits of living, or perhaps they were stripped from him. He reverted from a conditioned product of environment and experience to an inchoate creature craving escape and survival and exercising every power it possessed. And again, the miracle of 2 years ago took place. The undivided energy of an entire human organism, of every cell, fiber, nerve, and muscle, empowered that craving. And again, Foyle space jaunted. He went hurtling along the geodesical space lines of the curving universe at the speed of thought, far exceeding that of light. His spatial velocity was so frightful that his time axis was twisted from the vertical line drawn from the past through now to the future. He went flickering along the new near horizontal axis, this new space-time geodesic, driven by the miracle of a human mind no longer inhibited by concepts of the impossible. Again, he achieved what Helmut Grant and Enzio Dandridge and scores of other experimenters had failed to do, because his blind panic forced him to abandon the spatio-temporal inhibitions that had defeated previous attempts. He did not jaunt to elsewhere, but to elsewhen. But most important, the fourth dimensional awareness, the complete picture of the arrow of time and his position on it, which is born in every man, but deeply submerged by the trivia of living, was in Foyle close to the surface. He jaunted along the space-time geodesics to elsewheres and elsewhens, translating I, the square root of -1, from an imaginary number into reality by a magnificent act of imagination. He jaunted back through time to his past. He became the Burning Man who had inspired himself with terror and perplexity on the beach in Australia, in a quack's office in Shanghai, on the Spanish stairs in Rome, on the moon, in the Skopje colony on Mars. He jaunted back through time, revisiting the savage battles that he himself fought in Gully Foyle's tiger hunt for vengeance. His flaming appearances were sometimes noted, other times not. He jaunted. He was a bored nomad, drifting in the empty frost of space. He stood in the door to nowhere. The cold was the taste of lemons, and the vacuum was a rake of talons on his skin. The sun and the stars were a shaking ague that racked his bones. Motion roared in his ears.
Loma Fredness!
It was a figure with its back to him, vanishing down the corridor. A figure with a copper cauldron of provisions over its shoulder. A figure darting, floating, squirming through freefall. It was Gully Foyle. The sight of his motion bellowed.
Me just wrote.
The flicker of light and shade answered.
Aha! Oh ho! Me get not to tack.
The whirling raffle of debris in his wake murmured.
Oh, so.
The lemon taste in his mouth became unbearable. The rake of talons on his skin was torture. He jaunted. He reappeared in the furnace beneath Old St. Pat's less than a second after he had disappeared from there. He was drawn, as the seabird is drawn, again and again to the flames from which it is struggling to escape. He endured the roaring torture for only another moment. He jaunted. He was in the depths of Gouffre Martel. The velvet black darkness was bliss, paradise, euphoria.
Ah!
Came the echo of his voice, and the sound was translated into a blinding pattern of light. The burning man winced.
Stop!
He was blinded by the noise. Again came the dazzling pattern of the echo. A distant clatter of steps came to his eyes in soft patterns of vertical borealis streamers. It was the search party from the Gouffre Martel Hospital, tracking Foyle and Gisbella McQueen by geophone. The burning man disappeared, but not before he had unwittingly decoyed the searchers from the trail of the vanished fugitives. He was back under Old St. Pat's, reappearing only an instant after his last disappearance. His wild beatings into the unknown sent him stumbling up geodesic space-time lines that inevitably brought him back to the now he was trying to escape. For in the inverted saddle curve of space-time, his now was the deepest depression in the curve.
He was on the brawling Spanish
He
step.
was on the
He
brawling
was on
Spanish
the brawling
stairs.
Spanish stairs.
Was on the brawling Spanish stairs.
On the brawling
He
Spanish
was on the
stairs.
brawling,
He was on the brawling
Spanish
Spanish
stairs.
stairs.
He could drive himself up the geodesic lines into the past or future, but inevitably he must fall back into his own now, like a thrown ball hurled up the sloping walls of an infinite pit, to land, hang poised for a moment, and then roll back into the depths. But still, he beat into the unknown in his desperation. Again, he jaunted. He was on Jervis Beach on the Australian coast. The motion of the surf was bawling.
Lager Miss God Heaven.
The churning of the surf blinded him with the lights of batteries of footlights. Gully Foyle and Robin Wensbury stood before him. The body of a man lay on the sand, which felt like vinegar in the burning man's mouth. The wind brushing his face tasted like brown paper. Foyle opened his mouth and exclaimed. The sound came out in burning star bubbles. Foyle took a step. The motion blared.
Crash!
The burning man jaunted. He was in the office of Dr. Sophia Orell in Shanghai. Foyle was again before her, speaking light patterns. He flickered back to the agony of Old St. Pat's and jaunted again. The burning man jaunted. It was cold again, with the taste of lemons, and vacuum raked his skin with unspeakable talons. He was peering through the porthole of a silvery yawl. The jagged mountains of the moon towered in the background. Through the porthole, he could see the jangling racket of blood pumps and oxygen pumps, and hear the uproar of the motion Gully Foyle made toward him. The clawing of the vacuum caught his throat in an agonizing grip. The geodesic lines of space-time rolled him back to now under Old St. Pat's, where less than 2 seconds had elapsed since he first began his frenzied struggle. Once more, like a burning spear, he hurled himself into the unknown. He was in the Skopje catacomb on Mars. The white slug that was Lindsay Joyce was writhing before him. Her motion screamed.
No, 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 don't hurt me. Don't kill me. No, please, please.
The burning man opened his tiger mouth.
She hurts.
The sound of his voice burned his eyes.
Who are you?
The burning man winced.
Too bright. That's light.
Foyle took a step forward. The motion roared.
Rakadama.
The burning man clapped his hands over his ears in agony.
Too loud. Don't move so loud.
The writhing Skopje's motion was still screaming, beseeching.
Don't hurt me. Don't hurt me.
The burning man laughed again. She was mute to normal men, but to his free cross senses, her meaning was clear.
Listen to her. She's screaming, begging. She doesn't want to die. She doesn't want to be hurt. Listen to her.
It was Olivia Presteign gave the order. Olivia Presteign, not me. Don't hurt me. Olivia Presteign.
She's telling who gave the order. Can't you hear? Listen with your eyes. She says, Olivia.
What?
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 The checkerboard glitter of Foyle's question was too much for him. The burning man interpreted the Skopje's agony again.
She says, Olivia, Olivia Presteign, Olivia Presteign, Olivia Presteign.
He jaunted. End of episode 16.